Great. Thank you so much. Is this view good? You're able to see my
Yes,
slide?
it
Okay,
is.
excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jen. I'm Kelly Morrow. I'm a registered dietitian at Seattle Integrative Medicine, and I help people with Parkinson's figure out what to eat. So I am doing this series to help with orienting around some of the diet and lifestyle patterns that are associated with people who are progressing more slowly in their Parkinson's. So today we're going to be talking about fighting inflammation with your fork. I wanted to, before we launch in, there were a couple of questions that I didn't get to last time. And so I wanted to address those. And one of them was a question about silicone. So we had a pretty robust discussion around plastic and sort of investigating all of the ways that we might be trying to reduce plastic exposure. We know plastic water bottles are potentially, they're associated with in that pro-PD dietary pattern that has an affiliation with people who are progressing a little bit more quickly. So in general, we want to try to reduce plastic exposure. And so someone was asking, a couple of people were asking about silicone and if it was any better. And I did look, I looked through some resources. I did find a study from this year looking from a comprehensive review in Food Science and Food Safety Journal, Progress in Research on Safety of Silicone Rubber Products in Food Processing. And overall, it seems like it's pretty safe. It's made with silica, which is a kind of, mineral found in the earth and sand. It's pretty inert. Carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. And so it is considered to be inert and non-toxic and doesn't leach into foods or produce fumes. The thing that I did find in doing some reading here and other places was that there's very little information, or there's not a lot of evidence that it causes harm, except if you're buying silicone that is kind of low quality, that might not just be medical grade or food grade. Maybe it has other things that are added into it that can leach out. So that is something that happens. And then if you're staying within the temperature guidelines, so not heating it above 500 degrees. And then if your silicone is cracked or damaged, then it, that could be potentially problematic, but maybe only if it's not food grade. So what I would say is, to be safe, just buy medical grade, food grade, pay attention to temperature ranges, and then replace if there's any sign of wear or breakdown. And if you still feel a little bit unsure about it, I would say, just use it maybe sparingly, like if you have spatulas or things like that, if you don't want to cook in it. But I wasn't able to find lots of alarm bells about it, except for products that might have that might be of low quality. And then right at the end, someone said, wait a minute, wheat is associated with, and bread is associated with faster progression. And so I wanted to clarify that a little bit more for everybody, because I know it's such a common thing that people eat. And if we're talking about a plant-based diet, it's a part of so many different cultural traditions, and also it's very prevalent in food in our country. And so, bread and pasta have a weak correlation in the PRO-PD study. And so what that means is that when we're looking at foods and dietary patterns of people who are progressing through their Parkinson's, people who eat bread more often, it does show up as a weak correlation. It doesn't mean it causes Parkinson's. It might be something that's related to a combination of foods that people are eating. Like maybe if you're eating hot dogs on white hamburger buns that are white hot dog buns, that's worse than if you're eating a whole grain bread. So here's how I would recommend that you take in this information. Avoid wheat or gluten if you feel better not eating it. And gluten is just a protein that's found in wheat. Choose organic, minimally processed whole grain if you're going to be eating wheat. Sourdough and sprouted wheat is easier to digest. So a lot of times I'll recommend like Ezekiel bread, or you can find like Silver Hills as a brand that makes sprouted bread. Consider using maybe ancient greens like spelt, emmer, kamut, einkorn. They're often not genetically modified and many times not sprayed with pesticides. And then if wheat is your main grain or starch, if you're eating it multiple times a day, I would say just consider adding in some more options. So a variety of different types of grains and starches. So there's so many different types of rices. I just bought black rice. There's red rice, there's wild rice, right? And wild rice is maybe a little bit different than regular rice, but there's so many different starches to choose from. And I kind of looked around the world at what people are eating from, from the Americas, Africa, Asia, quinoa, millet, sorghum, buckwheat, barley, teff, corn. I would say if you're eating corn, make sure it's organic because it has a pretty high pesticide content. Amaranth, fonio, eba, gari. That's actually a fermented cassava that's eaten in parts of Africa. It's really delicious. Winter squash, sweet potatoes, all the root vegetables that are out there. So I would say just consider expanding what you're doing. So that's just a little bit of follow-up from last week. Definitely, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and we can address those. And if we don't have time today, I can address them next time. Here's what we're going to be covering today regarding inflammation. So looking at the relationship between inflammation and Parkinson's, exploring the anti-inflammatory and neuroprotective effects of phytonutrients, herbs, and spices on brain health. And then we're going to be describing creative ways to incorporate those into your diet. When I was preparing this, I asked DALL-E, which is an artificial intelligence program, to create an image that reflected an anti-inflammatory diet and lifestyle using fire to represent inflammation. And I was so impressed with this image because I think it really sums it up really nicely in terms of this, kind of beautiful landscape that does have elements of fire in it, but the fire is not taking over. And there are elements in here like the water that are able to help with managing that fire flame that's a little bit large. And we see this person here who looks very peaceful, who's holding elements of fire, which could be that inflammation, but it's also in this really kind of lush environment. And optimally, that's what we would want an inflammatory response to look like in our body, that it would be kind of targeted. It's part of our immune system and it's very important. But when we have chronic illnesses like Parkinson's or other illnesses, like maybe we've got, different aspects of heart disease or other immune disorders, or even something like, arthritis, where inflammation is more a part of our presentation, right? So if that picture might look like there's a little bit more fire in here, that maybe the environment was having a hard time managing. So what we want to do is, if we have a chronic condition that does create more fire in our environment, we want to have strategies for helping to calm that down so that it doesn't take over and that it doesn't progress what's happening within our bodies. And pretty universally, if you read about Parkinson's and some of its influences on progression, we will see references to inflammation, which is an immune system that's sort of heightened and could be causing some damage in our brain and our body. There are lots of studies looking at dietary and lifestyle habits that help reduce inflammation. And also in the ProPD study that Dr. Mishley has been doing, she finds that people who are following more of a plant-based diet tend to have lower inflammatory markers when we measure them in the blood, and also a subjective experience of less inflammation. Like I said, maybe less aches and pains, less motor symptoms, non-motor symptoms, some of those things that are related to inflammation with Parkinson's. So if we're defining an anti-inflammatory diet and lifestyle, and those both are important parts, we want to have more plants, more herbs and spices and teas, so more of these phytonutrients we started to talk about in our last class. We want to be careful about the types of fats that we eat, both the type and the processing of the fat. We want to be careful about sugar. And then we also want to think about exposures that we might have, whether it's pesticides, chemicals, personal care products, cleaning products, things that are chemicals, thinking again, our body is a computer. Anything that we introduce to it that's artificial is perhaps a greater challenge for our body to deal with. We can also think about some of the foundations of health, like getting good sleep, laughing, staying physically active, being connected with others. These are all aspects of lifestyle that can help reduce inflammation as well. As a reminder, these are the foods that are related with faster and slower progression. So we're going to use that as a guideline and a foundation for the recommendations and the recipes and foods that we'll talk about during all of the classes. So more plant-based foods, less fried foods, and animal products. And again, I would recommend, if you haven't already, try to see how many negative points you can end up with at the end of each day, and thinking about your foods in terms of how many negative points you get. Obviously, we're going to be eating foods that have positive points, but if we can get lots of these negative points in, and if over time, if we're finding, oh, we're eating a lot of one of these foods really regularly, can we look at ways that maybe we reduce that? So thinking about how you shift that over time. This is a paper. I'm always taking a look at different studies on nutrition and Parkinson's, and this is one that came out in July. It was a review of 52 randomized controlled trials, and looking at sort of influences on Parkinson's disease, including things like exposures to things like heavy metals, pesticides. It talks about gut dysbiosis, meaning an imbalance of bacteria in the gut, and oxidative stress leading to neuroinflammation. So again, as I mentioned before, inflammation is brought up over and over when we're looking at influences on Parkinson's. So what they found in this study was that a Mediterranean-style diet was associated with less motor and non-motor symptoms. We talked about that last time. It's mostly a plant-based diet. It was also associated with less inflammation, neuroinflammation, and a healthier gut microbiota. The gut microbiome is talked about a lot in nutritional research in terms of its relationship to Parkinson's. And I know, this type of data is maybe a review for some of you, but it is important to remember that there is a connection between the gut and the brain. And there is a nervous system pathway between the gut and the brain, whereby some of the different byproducts of metabolism of our gut microbiome, so the bacteria in our gut, can travel up to the brain. And so if we're exposed to chemicals and pesticides, if there could be other reasons just associated with Parkinson's, the disease process that causes that inflammatory process as well. What it can do is it can create this inflammatory environment. That inflammatory environment is also linked with that aggregation and the folding of the alpha-synuclein. Those inflammatory compounds and the alpha-synuclein can travel up to the brain and cause inflammation in the brain. And so we think about, how do we reduce exposure to inflammatory compounds? How do we support our microbiome to be optimally healthy? And how do we reduce inflammation overall? So that's going to be what we talk about today. There are a number of papers looking at exposures, including pesticides being a major one in relation to Parkinson's. And so I think it's prudent to try to reduce your exposure as much as possible. Some of the studies are animal and cell culture. And so, obviously more research and data is needed, and everybody's body is different. And so we can't universally say that there's a similar impact on each person. But if we use something called a precautionary principle, meaning that if it seems likely that it could be problematic, it's probably a good idea to avoid that. So in animal models and cell cultures, multiple pesticides induce superoxide production. So that's something that increases inflammation in our mitochondria, which is a part of our cells that produce energy. And if those get damaged, it causes the cells to either become damaged or die. And then this increases inflammation, which was shown to also increase inflammation in the brain. So again, these are just some, scientific backing for some of the things that I'm going to be talking about today. How do we reduce pesticide exposure? Buying organic food or food from local farmers who don't use chemicals. I'm actually really a proponent of supporting local farmers. There are lots of farmers who are small farmers who don't have the money to go through all of the organic certification, but they don't use pesticides. And so you'll find them at farmers markets, and often their produce is really affordable. Avoid spraying pesticides in your own yard. So the Roundup and the other chemicals that you might spray, using a filter for your water. Water is a source of some of that exposure. And then just being aware of some of the environments that are high, that have high pesticide residue, like golf courses, some public parks, playgrounds, sports play fields and schoolyards, and also non-organic farms. Now, we might not always have control over how we're, living around these or interacting with these environments, but there are some strategies that can be helpful. One of them is, we talked about this before, which was looking at which are the foods that are the highest and lowest in pesticides. So there are some foods that have very low pesticide content. This is from the Environmental Working Group, and they published the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, meaning they're looking at different foods produce that are produced and quantifying the ones that have lots of pesticides and few pesticides. So here we see the ones with the most, a lot of berries and such. And then the fewest pesticides, so avocados, sweet corn, pineapple, onions, papaya, asparagus, honeydew, right? These are some of the ones with the fewest pesticides where we might not have to worry so much about the exposure. So what if you can't avoid exposure? I would say support your organs of elimination, and that would be like your liver, your gut, and also your skin is an organ of elimination. So sweating, drinking lots of water. I always say the solution to pollution is dilution. Eat lots of protected plant-based foods and phytochemicals. We're going to launch into that here in just a moment. There's lots of ways we can support our body in terms of handling and processing some of the things we're exposed to. And then just minimize exposure wherever you have control. So if you know that some place that, is a public place that you frequent, you could find out if they do. If you're an activist person, you could say, start a petition to have them not use pesticides or chemicals. So there's lots of different ways to approach it, but I think doing the best you can and supporting your own organs of elimination is probably one of the best ways to do it. Phytochemicals are one of those really fantastic ways to help support organs of elimination, meaning that they help our body to get rid of things we might get exposed to, but they also help to reduce inflammation. So what are phytochemicals? These are plant compounds that have pigments. Typically, they're brightly colored, but they're also the compounds in plants that have aroma and flavor. So if you think about anything brightly colored, like berries, like herbs and spices, I would say anything that would stain your clothing is really high in these phytochemicals. And phytochemicals not only reduce inflammation, but they act as antioxidants. They help our immune function. They also help with enzymes in our liver that help to get rid of maybe chemicals and things we're exposed to. And then they're also cell regulators. And this is, I think, one of the most interesting thing about phytochemicals is that these phytochemicals, when they bind with our cells, they actually communicate with our cells to help reduce inflammation. It's almost like when they touch our cells, they tell our cells, hey, everything's okay. You don't need to be afraid and produce all of these cytokines that are causing inflammation. So that's why it's so powerful and important to eat phytochemicals. And it's also associated with people who eat more of them. It's associated with slower progression of Parkinson's. And we see it also with multiple health conditions, with cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, other types of inflammatory conditions. So pretty universally, our bodies do well with eating these and operate at a higher level. So when we're looking at these different phytonutrients, they have names that you may or may not have heard before, things like rutin, which you would find in a lot of whole grains, or camphorol, which we find in brassica or like cruciferous vegetables. Quercetin is one that we find in apples and onions. Apigenin we find in like parsley. catechin in teas. So these are a lot of the different names of them, but there are thousands of these compounds. We don't know all of them, but what they can do, especially with Parkinson's, is they can help protect the cells and the neurons and downregulate that immune response. I gave this to you before, but what would be probably your best approach for increasing phytonutrients is to think about how many colors you can get on your plate. So if you're looking at your plate and it's all one color, can you add something else in? And it doesn't have to be complicated. It could be that you just maybe cut up a cucumber or a green pepper or a red pepper, or maybe you grab a handful of carrots, or maybe you have a handful of berries or an apple, right? So any way that you can add more color and more phytonutrients multiple times a day, you'll be taking in these compounds that are communicating with your cells to calm down inflammation. So I think this is a great handout to print out, to keep on hand, just so that you can remind yourself of all of the variety of different plants. If you go to a farmer's market or go to a variety of grocery stores, you'll see these different plants and maybe try something new that you haven't tried. So polyphenols are another type of these phytochemicals, and they're talked about a lot. So these are neuroprotective, and they also, what's really cool about polyphenols is that they feed our gut microbiota. So they are actually helping to nourish the bacteria in our gut so that they're healthier. They also help to regulate genetic expression, to turn down inflammation. And in many cases, they can cross the blood-brain barrier, which means they can get into the brain and they can calm down inflammation in the brain. So you can see, again, we're talking about lots of plant-based foods, brightly colored foods, that they help the gut. And then the way that the gut metabolizes these polyphenols, they have all of these different effects, again, systemically, cancer, diabetes, inflammation, brain health, cardiac health. These are some of the foods that are really rich in these polyphenols. And for those of you who want to see kind of the image of the molecules and what they're called, like you might have heard of resveratrol, which we find in purple grapes and wine and such and other berries. We find them in pomegranates, green and black tea, lentils and other beans, lots of herbs and spices like cinnamon, flax seeds, walnuts, dark chocolate. That's just kind of scratching the surface. You can see that they are spread throughout the food supply, but mostly in these plant-based foods. Additional polyphenols. So again, there are a number of studies looking at these compounds that have been shown as mostly in animal and cell cultures, but we're thinking that it also happens in human bodies, is that when we take these compounds in regularly, it can help reduce some of the folding and malformation of that protein that's related to Parkinson's disease, that alpha-synuclein. So again, looking at, chamomile, celery, parsley, teas, grapes, apple juice, or apples, cocoa, chocolate, lentils, alfalfa. Might not eat alfalfa, but grapes, walnuts, lots of, onions, nuts and seeds, right? Rosemary, oregano, sage. We find them throughout the food supply. This is another compound that I think is really interesting aspect of the science behind why this works, is that this compound NRF2 is a nuclear factor. So what it means is it's a transcription factor. It's a part of our cellular structure that helps to reduce the expression of genes that make inflammatory compounds. And so when we eat these polyphenols, and you can see again, like onions, citrus, apples, grapes, green tea, cruciferous vegetables, right? When we eat these polyphenols, it actually helps the expression of this compound that tells the cells to turn off the production of inflammatory compounds. So just a little bit more of the science behind it and why it's so important to eat these foods regularly. So lots and lots of ways we can get polyphenol-rich meals and snacks. Again, looking at that phytonutrient spectrum, thinking about how you might add that in. I think stir fries are probably one of the best ways to do that. You can add so many different plant-based compounds or, different vegetables and fruits, nuts and seeds. Here's a stir fry where we have some tofu and broccoli and green beans and peppers. We've got some cashews in here. So, you could also add some different herbs and spices in there, whether you added lemongrass or maybe some basil, peppers, that like chili peppers, any of that, you're just going to be adding more and more of those polyphenols. Eating berries here in the Pacific Northwest, they're so abundant. Maybe having a smoothie is a great way to take in more of those polyphenols. Green tea, herbal teas, those are also great. I actually am just drinking water right now, but most of the time I drink tea because it's such a great way to get in more of those phytonutrients that are so anti-inflammatory. Let's talk a little bit about herbs and spices. This is another one where some people might not be as adventuresome, but I think that the more that you can expand your palette and to increase some of your herbs and spices, the more polyphenols, the more phytonutrients you're going to take in this really, really concentrated way. And so there's lots of different combinations. And one of my favorite things I learned when I was studying nutrition was that if you're not sure which herbs and spices taste good together, you can do something called a nose harmonica, which means that you can take two herbs or spices and sort of smell them together. And if they smell good together, they will often taste good together. And so a lot of times that works really well. And you might think of one of them as being the dominant and then one of them being sort of supportive. So for instance, you might have like chili powder, like if we're looking at some of the Mexican spices, you might say, okay, I'm gonna have chili powder and I'm gonna see if chili powder, cumin and cinnamon taste good together. And you might just smell and you're like, wow, that does smell good. And it's an easy way to sort of put those together. And you might say, okay, I'm gonna have chili powder be the dominant and I'm gonna put a little less of those other two. You can certainly mix and match around. If you're not as comfortable with that, I would use a recipe to just make sure that all those ratios are correct. But many times it's pretty forgiving. You don't have to have it be a really exact amount. But I would say, choose different herbs that maybe, ones that you either already know you like, or maybe choose something that you haven't used very much. Like maybe you don't use paprika very often, or maybe you don't use curry powder very often. But anytime you can get these herbs and spices in, it can be really beneficial. And 1 teaspoon is worth -40 points. So pretty powerful. I think, cinnamon is such a great spice to add in, and you can get cinnamon tea actually. Some people don't think about how you can use herbs in maybe unexpected ways. So people might think, oh, I put cinnamon on my apples, or I put, cinnamon in my oats, but maybe won't think about how you could have cinnamon as a tea. So there's lots and lots of ways to incorporate them. And there's also multiple resources for herbs and spices as well. These are some of my favorites. Those of you who are here in the Pacific Northwest or in Seattle might have heard of World Spice in the Pike Market. They do mail order and they have all these amazing combinations. You can literally take a trip around the world and see all of the amazing combinations that they have. I don't work for any of these companies or get paid from any of these companies. I'm just sharing some of the resources I really like. These are a couple of my favorites from World Spice. So adobo, where we've got garlic, onion, cumin, black pepper, Turkish oregano, orange, lemon. Crystal, I tell you, it is such an amazing flavor. You can put it on so many different things, from starches to proteins to legumes. It's got a fantastic flavor. And then chimichurri is another one. So this is like an Argentinian preparation where we have different spices with oregano and bay leaf. Really fantastic as well. Mountain Rose is a great place to get some herbs, especially medicinal herbs. Burlap and Barrel is another one. And then also just local health food stores and herb stores will have herbs and spice preparations as well. So I'd encourage you to give some of those a try. Lots and lots of negative points if you do that. And remember, negative points are positive. When you're thinking about meal planning and sort of how you're putting that all together, remember we want to have half of our plate be vegetables and fruits if possible. And if you're putting together a meal, it doesn't have to be fancy. You could literally pick a vegetable, pick a protein, pick a starch. And then if you have some herb and spice mixtures that can really kind of bring it all together. And so whether that's a dressing, a marinade, maybe some fermented food like a pickle or something like that, but these are all going to be adding lots and lots of negative points and benefits to your health overall. There's even been research looking at if you barbecue. So I know on sunny days we might be thinking about the summer and people might be moving outside to cook their food more. And if you're barbecuing, that can create some compounds that are like linked with cancer and other inflammatory conditions. But if you marinate your proteins in some sort of herbs or spices, like there's such a variety of different ones that have been shown to help reduce those compounds. So you can actually reduce the chemical changes that happen from cooking over flames by up to 90% by using lemons, different types of herbs and spices, using some sort of marinade. You can make your food safer if you're cooking it on a grill. So we know that there are so many ways that these herbs and spices are helpful. You can drink them, you can add them to your food. I would say if you have a recipe that calls for 1 clove of garlic, use 3. If it calls for 1 teaspoon of herbs, use 3. You know, you can often ramp it up to your taste, of course, but any way you can get them in, you're going to be benefiting your brain quite a lot. Let's talk about fat, because that's another aspect of inflammation that our diet can really, that our fats are another food component that can really affect inflammation, both in our body and our brain. And so there are some fats that are known to be associated with more inflammation. And so, you know, that's going to be like foods that are deep fried, so fats that are heated to high temperatures. Trans fats or hydrogenated fats, those are not allowed to be included in our food supply anymore, although they are allowed, but only in small amounts. And so if you're eating a food that has something that says partially hydrogenated, that is a fat that's known to be linked with inflammation. Highly processed fats, so if you're having fats that are highly processed. That might be something like a canola oil that comes in like a plastic bottle that is not, say, cold pressed, or that it's got, I guess it would, I guess the way that you know if a fat is highly processed or not is by looking at the different brands and knowing which ones are minimally processed. And usually they will say that on the label. Like for instance, if it's an olive oil, it'll say cold pressed. So looking for fats that are in glass bottles that are minimally processed will be important. And then some of the animal-based fats and saturated fats, especially that you find in red meat. So these are the fats that are known to increase inflammation. Fats that decrease inflammation are going to be things like olive oil. And a lot of the research that looks at following a Mediterranean pattern, people might be surprised that the recommended amount of olive oil is at least 4 tablespoons per day. So that's a 1/4 cup of olive oil per day. A lot of people don't eat that much olive oil. And you might think, well, that's just a lot of olive oil. It's maybe, you know, if you are someone who's concerned about eating more calories than you need, you might say, well, that's a lot. But, you know, olive oil has lots of anti-inflammatory properties to it. It also is really high in those polyphenols that help nourish our good bacteria. And so that's the amount in most of the research on Mediterranean diets that's shown to be protective. Avocados and avocado oil, coconut oil, nuts and seeds, and fish. And you can see here, you know, for olive oil, 1 teaspoon is -10 points. So a tablespoon is -30 points. So it's quite a lot. When you're looking at nuts and seeds, if you have a 1/4 cup, -25 points. For fish, -27. So these are the types of fats you want to try to include more often in your diet. And then cooking methods that make a difference. So avoiding the smoke point. If you're cooking in if you're going to be sauteing something, heat up the pan first and then put the oil in and then put the food in so that you're not heating the oil slowly so that it starts to smoke. just do a quick saute. That can be helpful. And then usually you don't need to heat your pan more than on medium heat. So I would avoid turning it up to high heat because you're going to be more likely to damage the oils if you're using high heat. Oils like coconut oil can handle some high heat, but for the most part, if you're using olive oil or avocado oil, you want to be careful not to smoke those oils because that's going to make them more inflammatory. Omega-3s are associated with better brain health, and they are anti-inflammatory. They also protect some of those cells in the brain from death, and they can also improve mood and attention. And these are called essential fatty acids because we have to get them from our diet. And so we can see here, over here on the omega-3 side, these are the ways that we're going to get those omega-3s. So green leafy vegetables, flax and chia seeds, canola, walnut, soybean oils. I would say for like canola and soybean, make sure that you're getting organic and that they're in glass bottles, that they're minimally processed, because some of those can be very highly processed oils where they're extracted with high heat and then they use deodorizers and things so that they don't smell bad because of the processing. So I would buy from, organic brands that store them in glass bottles. Hemp seeds, fish, algae oil. If you're taking supplements, algae oil will have omega-3s. So these are the foods that we mostly find have these omega-3s. And we want to make sure that we're eating a variety of these in our diet to make sure that we've got those omega-3s. Here's some information about the quality of fish. And we know that because our environment our oceans have some pollution in them, we want to try to get fish that have a lower level of pollution, especially mercury from industrial waste runoff. And so this is from the EPA, through the US government. So looking at best choices for fish that's low in mercury, we can see that there's quite a good list over here. And then also, fish to avoid that are really high. So I would make sure that you keep this as a reference so that you can choose the fish that won't give you higher levels of those mercury compounds. If you're not sure if you're getting enough omega-3, you can actually order a kit from this company called OmegaQuant. It's a CLIA certified lab, so it's a legitimate lab that you can order this test from. And I think it's about $50. All you do is prick your finger and dab it on this blotting paper that they send you, and you send it back to the lab, and they'll tell you the percentage of omega-3s that are in your cells. So you can actually test really easily if you have an optimal level of omega-3s. Here's a recipe for nori wrap salmon that we make frequently in our house. It's such a great way to get some sea vegetables, which are so high in minerals, some miso, which is a great source of fermented foods that support our gut microbiome. We also have herbs and spices. We have olive oil. We have some salmon that's so high in omega-3s. And it's such a forgiving way to cook your salmon if you fold it up in the nori, that it's harder to overcook it. So this is a nice way to cook salmon if you aren't used to cooking. Typically, we would say about 10 minutes per inch of fish, and you do want to pull it out before it's all the way done so it doesn't overcook. But like I said, if you wrap it like this, it's a really nice way to prevent overcooking in some ways. You can also use parchment paper, but nori is a nice edible way to do that. Here are some other creative ways to get omega-3s. Chia pudding. Chia seeds are not only high in soluble fiber and omega-3s, but they are also really high in calcium and other minerals, so they're a very nutrient-dense seed. And it's very easy to make a pudding that you could have as a dessert or as a breakfast or a snack. This chia berry compote is really delicious, where you can use frozen berries, maybe a little bit of orange juice and some chia seeds. And you could use this to top, like if you had, you could put it on oats, you could put it on like toast, you could just eat it by the spoonful. Flax crackers, this is another way. This company, Flackers, makes flax crackers, but you could also make them yourself. It's really easy. And then here's a recipe for flax tortillas where you use ground flax meal, and you can easily make them like a crepe, and they store pretty well, especially in the freezer. Let's talk a little bit about sugar. Sugar is something that is pretty universally a taste that everybody enjoys, and it's sometimes hard to control ourselves around sugar. I thought this is a funny cartoon. I hate it when I think I'm buying organic vegetables, and when I get home, it turns out they're just regular donuts. I'm sure all of us have had the intention of buying these nourishing foods, and certainly if you go to the grocery store hungry, it makes it harder to make the decision you want to. But there's lots of reasons why people with Parkinson's might crave sugar more. And one of them could be because low dopamine levels can actually increase sugar cravings. And then when there's some evidence that sugar increases dopamine levels in the brain. So when we eat sugar, we're actually able, like if our meal composition has more sugar in it, we actually absorb more of the proteins into our brain, which helps us make more dopamine. And then if you're trying to eat a little bit lower protein because of trying to avoid interactions with your medication, it can sometimes increase sugar cravings. So it's very common that people with Parkinson's are craving sugar. And so we do know that Parkinson's is associated with impaired metabolism of glucose, meaning the way that our body and brain manages glucose, and it can lead to increased sugar cravings because of that. And then elevated blood sugar can lead to increased neuroinflammation. So lots of papers on how the excess intake of excess intake of sugar can aggravate that inflammatory process and potentially lead to increased alpha-synuclein. I like to talk about a concept called sweets that give back. So typically when we're eating sugar, if it's say white refined sugar, it comes into our body without anything to offer except carbohydrate. And it needs a lot of nutrients in order to process. And so if we eat white sugar, it can actually be depleting to some of our nutrients. And some of those nutrients and minerals are really important for our immune system, for antioxidant networks that we make in our own body. So I like to recommend people eat sweets that have something to offer. And so those are sweets that actually give you some of those nutrients. They come in with nutrients that help your body to process them. We already talked about this blueberry compote here. This is a great way to get not only those polyphenols, those antioxidants that are so helpful, but it comes in with fiber that helps slow down that sugar absorption, and also has lots of vitamins and minerals that help us to process the sugar. This is one of my favorite recipes if you like brownies. It's made out of raw walnuts. That's the base. So walnuts, so lots of omega-3s, lots of fiber. It's got cacao powder or cocoa powder, and that's really high in polyphenols as well. And it has some baking soda, some salt, a couple of eggs, maple syrup. I've even used a little less than a half a cup, and then some vanilla. And it's so easy to make. You just make it in a food processor, and it is absolutely delicious and so simple. And it's really a perfect example of a sweet that gives back. And you can put this chia compote on it, and it is so fantastic. This is another option. I know it's winter, so maybe not as appealing, but if you are somebody who likes to have something cold or frozen, you can buy dairy-free yogurt and spread it out on some parchment paper on a baking sheet and put a variety of nuts and seeds and some fruits and berries in there, and then freeze it, and you can break it up and keep it in a bag in the freezer, and that can be a really nice option. Not only gives you probiotics, which helps with gut microbiome, but all the fiber and those polyphenols. So again, thinking of something sweet and enjoyable to eat that actually gives back to you. And this, I know I keep saying, I think it might be clear that I like sweets, but so I'm trying to always think of sweets that do offer me something. And so this is kind of a really quick and easy one if you like dates. Dates are really high in fiber. There's some research showing they don't spike blood sugar as much as other types of sweets, like more refined carbohydrates. So you can get a date, take the pit out, put some nut butter, whether it's almond butter or peanut butter, and then you could either put a little bit of coconut or cocoa powder. Sometimes I'll put a couple dark chocolate chips on there, or just the date and the peanut butter. And it's sweet, and it's got, you know, the nuttiness to it. It's really, really delicious. So I highly encourage you, if you're craving something sweet, this is an excellent, quick and easy way to eat a sweet that's going to give back. All right, so let's put it all together, and then I'll go to the questions here. So coming back to this picture of thinking about how do we keep that inflammation in balance, and one of the best ways to do that is by thinking about how many plants we can get in. So again, this image here is this beautiful environment that's full of plants, right? And so we have all the different plants that we can eat that helps keep our internal environment healthy. There's also this water element, so staying, you know, hydrated is also really important as well. If we do have any exposures that we want to help our body process. So plants, herbs and spices, being careful about the types of fats that you're using and how you treat them and how you cook with them, being mindful about the sugar. That can take some time to bring down if you're used to eating lots of sugar. If you are a member of Dr. Mishley's PD school, Parkinson school, I did a class on sugar. There's a whole class that I did if you wanted to tune into that. And then for lifestyle, getting good sleep. If we don't sleep, it can increase some of our hormones in our body that make us more hungry and make our blood sugar less stable, so that we're craving more sweets. Social connections, laughing, things that help reduce stress, and moving your body. These are all ways to reduce inflammation. So our last class is going to be February 9th. We're going to be talking about brain supportive foods, nutrients, and dietary patterns. So I'll cover a little bit more about some things like intermittent fasting or ketogenic, or, you know, different dietary patterns that are associated with a healthy brain. Plus, we'll spend a lot more time talking about specific foods and recipes that you can use in your daily eating to help support your brain health. All right, let's go to some of the questions here. So we have a question here. When cooking on a sheet pan, is it okay to line the metal with foil or parchment? I would actually recommend getting an unbleached parchment paper. So you can find, especially in health food stores, you can find brands that say unbleached parchment, and so I would use an unbleached parchment. You could use a silicone baking sheet as well, or if you wanted to, you could just, you know, put like a little bit of coconut oil on the sheet, and depends on what you're making, you could just do it that way. But I wouldn't recommend using foil because you can leach some of the different chemicals there. There's a question here about drinking tap water to get more minerals. Does filter water retain the minerals? You know, we actually, here in the Pacific Northwest, we have really clean tap water. So it just depends on where, you know, it just depends on where you are and how safe your drinking water is. If you filter water, it probably does filter out some of the minerals. I don't know exactly which ones are retained and which ones aren't. You know, water can be a source of minerals, but I think our food supply is a really great source of minerals as well. So I think, you know, focusing on that is probably a more reliable way to make sure you're getting a variety of minerals, eating those plant-based foods, which those plants just pull minerals out of the earth, especially if you're buying organic or farmers that are really taking care of their soil, which you often find at farmers markets or, you know, health food stores, organic markets, where the soil is maybe more rich and full of minerals. Or if you grow some of your own too, you can really make sure you're getting minerals. Sea vegetables like seaweed, kelp, kombu, these are great ways to get minerals as well. And, you know, eating eating a variety of nuts and seeds and legumes and those types of foods are great for minerals. So another question about, oh, right. Someone was correcting me about Roundup is an herbicide, not a pesticide. So I appreciate that. Yes, so herbicides and pesticides are both something that we want to try to minimize our exposure to. So thank you for that correction. And then, is there any research in using nicotine in Parkinson's to reduce inflammation? I am actually not familiar with that, but I do know that paradoxically, smokers have a less of a risk of Parkinson's, but it's not something that we recommend people smoke because clearly, even though it could potentially be beneficial for Parkinson's, it's not beneficial for your heart, cardiovascular system, for cancer, for like all of the other negative effects. But I'm not sure about a nicotine patch, to be honest. Um, right, so somebody was also saying that with Parkinson's, it's hard to smell. And, you know, sometimes when you have really intensely flavored foods, like using some of those herbs and spices and phytochemicals, that can help you smell or taste a little bit more. And there are some protocols around that where I actually on PD school, and Dr. Mishley talks about this, and I also have a class on this too about that includes some of those different strategies for different herbs and spices that you can use either to smell or taste to help train yourself to remember what things smell like and to sort of help your body learn to pick up those senses a little bit again. But I think herbs and spices are a great way. The more, you know, garlic, onions, you know, chili powder, all of those different flavors you can add in, that can sometimes help your desire to eat some of these foods. Oh, is there a sleepy type of tea? You know, there are a few different ones. There's actually there's a combination out there called Sleepy Time, which does include a few different herbs like chamomile, valerian, skullcap. These are some herbs that are associated with sleep and helping you to sort of achieve a relaxed state. So you might want to look for some of those options out there. But chamomile is really a great one as well. Any way to make this affordable? Yes. Organic and health food stores are very, you know, expensive. And I think that is an incredibly important and valid point. I would say probably the best way to make it affordable would be to buy foods that are in season. And also, if you're using the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, you can look for some of those foods that are lower in pesticides and lower in pesticide content. And I would still say that it's better to get those fruits and vegetables, no matter if they're organic or not, than it would be to avoid them. And so the beneficial properties of those are still really important, whether they're organic or not. And there are other options that are out there too. For instance, if you do go to a farm stand or a farmer's market and you talk to the farmer, they might not use, especially if it's a small farmer, they might not use all of those chemicals as well. There's a lot of great places here in the Pacific Northwest, like Grocery Outlet is an option for buying. There's a lot of organic foods that are sort of closer to the expiration date that you can find at markets like that. So there are a variety of those. I can provide for the next class. I'll provide a list of some of those different options as well. I did do a whole class in Parkinson school on PD, you know, following this PD diet on a budget. So I can pull some of those resources out. And then let's see. The chart last week showing what's on the Mind diet seemed to recommend eating poultry twice a week, right? Yeah, so the modification for that, so, you know, these are Mediterranean and also Mind diet are both dietary patterns that are associated with support, like neurological support and other conditions as well. Mind diet more for neurological. What Lori has done with following, Dr. Mishley has done with following, you know, the 3,000 people over time, is she has found these correlations, and that the more that chicken is one, and actually it just kind of it's one that showed up a little bit more on this current iteration of the research, that it's an association. So it doesn't mean it causes it. I would just say that if you have Parkinson's, I would follow more of the PD Pro diet and try to minimize chicken. But I do know that a lot of people eat chicken. So it does have negative point value, but I would try to make sure that you, or sorry, it has a positive point value, but I would try to make sure that you are eating lots of the foods that have a negative point value with it, right? Like if you did a chicken stir fry with lots of herbs and spices, nuts and seeds, like that one that I showed a picture of. So I wouldn't recommend having chicken twice a week, but if you are eating it regularly, I would say, are there times where you could eat something else besides chicken, like maybe do a shrimp stir fry, or maybe do a tofu stir fry or something like that, so that you're kind of trying to bring in more of those pro-PD foods. Let's see. If access to fresh fruits and veg is limited, is it better to have frozen or canned? I would say probably frozen would be better than canned. Many of the frozen vegetables are, try to get organic if possible, or look at the ones that have the lower pesticide levels from the Dirty Dozen and Clean 15. But yeah, the cans are not only have some metals in them, and some of the soldering, and such that keeps them together might have aluminum and other metals that are not great for the brain. And then also most cans are lined with different types of plastic to help prevent the food from touching the metal. So I would say minimize cans as much as possible. And if you're not able to have fresh, then I would say frozen would be a good choice, because it also preserves the nutrient quality pretty well. All right. Well, it looks like I got to the end of the questions here. I will make a note to talk about some budget options for last time. Thank you for sharing your afternoon with me. And if there are additional follow-up questions, you can always send those to Jen, and I'll try to incorporate them next week as well. Thanks, everybody.
Excellent. Thank you for all the information, Kelly. Again, another very informative session. I am looking forward to session number 4. So I will, once again, you will get an email probably Monday or Tuesday or today if I get inspired, that has the video and a link to Kelly's slides. Same time, same place next week. I do want to tell those of you who are on the call today that I just opened registration for the next session in our series, and it is designed more for the caregiver, and is called Hands-on Helpful Caregiving. So it will be a 4-week series led by an occupational therapist who's going to talk about ergonomics, is going to talk about how you help somebody help themselves, how you what kind of assistive devices might be needed at some point in a journey with Parkinson's, and what does that look like, and how do you use them, and just it's really designed for that. So you can read more about it on our website. It'll also be out in the news you can use on Sunday, and I will put information in the wrap-up thing for this session as well. So it's out there. You will be able to see it. Feel free to pass it on, but that will be the next one in our series. So thank you so much, Kelly, for being here again. Thank you all in the audience, and we will see you next week. So everyone have a wonderful, I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.